In March 2023, the network Bravo decided to release a spin-off to their reality show, Summer House, by focusing on Martha's Vineyard and 12 Black professional friends who vacation there. I happened to come across this show during the WGA and SAG strike because, like I said in my Gilded Age video, I'm obsessed. And I found this show to be so interesting because I have my own personal connections to Martha's Vineyard. When I saw that they were doing a show that centered around Black professionals there, I immediately was intrigued. Also so happened that as I was being intrigued by this, I was coming across a book by Gloria Naylor. And this book really spoke to me in some weird way because when I was looking at the cover, I noticed that the woman just felt familiar. She didn't feel familiar in the sense that I knew the model, but she felt familiar in the sense that I felt like I knew where she was. I felt like I knew what she was thinking, or doing at least. And really, I think what made me notice her so much was because she reminded me of the women, the Black women in particular, that I felt used to vacation in Martha's Vineyard in the 90s. Once I read this book, though, I think not only did I end up questioning how I perceived that woman on that cover, but also how I perceived this show and the concept of Black excellence. So I decided to get some special juice and hyperfixate on this entire topic for about a few months. And it's taken a few months to get this video together because I have vacillated between being hyperfixated and also wondering if any of this is going to make any sense. But I gave myself a pep talk and I told myself, Taylor, you're going to do this and it's going to work and it's going to make sense.
So here we are.
And before I also get into this video, I do want to say hello if you are new to the channel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Please go ahead and like, subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell so you never miss a video here on Critical Commentary. For those who've never heard of Summer House, Martha's Vineyard, I'd like to give you a little bit of context by getting into the flagship series, which is just simply called Summer House. Summer House was aired in 2017 and centered around a group of friends who vacation at a shared home in the Hamptons of New York. During these weekends, they party, they drink, they have a good time. They also get into drama and relationship issues, and it's a mess.
Last weekend, I kissed Katie.
This is bullshit, which is partially why it's so entertaining.
The look in her eyes.
Psychopath.
The main purpose of this show, in my opinion, was to use Summer House as a vessel for crossover series. This is because in the flagship series, you see a lot of cast members from Southern Charm appear as party goers to the house members, as well as Vanderpump Rules in the earlier seasons. In a newer spinoff called Winter House Season 3, you even see cast members from Below Deck and Summer House Martha's Vineyard. But even still, this is not one of the bigger shows on the network, and I do think that it's interesting that this show was aired at a time that we were starting to see a decline in views. Now, I couldn't find a lot of research on why. All I know is that in 2023, Bravo's average views went down from 971,000 in 2016 to about 571,000 in 2023. This is also a really interesting thing to note because if you were to talk to anyone who was a part of Bravo or watches Bravo, especially those who were tuned into BravoCon this year, you would know that 2023 was an absolutely colossal year for the network. We had this Southern Charm drama between Shep, Taylor, and Austin, which also brought in Olivia, and I think the subsequent drama that happened at BravoCon with Shep's imbibement issues. Scandival, I mean, need I say more? The relationship issues between Kyle Richards and her husband Mo on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Below Deck Sailing Yachts, Gary King, not just being in the season 3 love triangle that was so messy, but also the alleged assault allegations to a production crew member. And Summer House's season 7 romance that went very, very wrong. And by that, yes, I'm talking about Lindsay Hubbard and Carl Radke. Oh, the tea. I love for it. BravoCon was a really interesting conference this year. There was a lot of drama that happened then, but I found it really interesting that even though the show Summer House Martha's Vineyard aired in March 2023, that they had a good section of the cast members already fan favorites and being held in very high positions at a few of their different panels. Ooh, okay, I like this. A little bit higher, a little bit higher. This is better. Okay. So I bet you're dying to know what happened in Summer House Martha's Vineyard season 1.
Kind of.
So in 2021, the Bravo production crew were floating around ideas for a possible spinoff to the Summer House series. They were looking at other affluent vacation spots and, like the Hamptons, decided that Martha's Vineyard would be a appropriate location for this new spinoff. I said before, I have a personal connection to Martha's Vineyard. As a child, I grew up spending my summers there. I rode my first horse there and also got bucked off that horse. I rode my first kayak there. I have a lot of memories that started in the Vineyard, and not just the Vineyard, but specifically Oak Bluffs, the Inkwell. I have a lot of black dog paraphernalia that I honestly wanted to wear for this video, but because most of that is like old and I've worn it to shreds, I thought going with like a preppier look would be more appropriate for this situation. Like I said, Martha's Vineyard is a very exclusive vacation spot in Massachusetts. They've hosted Larry David, Princess Di, Spike Lee, Jasmine Guy, the Obamas, Kennedys. You see where I'm going with this? Martha's Vineyard also happens to have a lot of indigenous and African cultural history, and I wish I was a little bit more knowledgeable about the specifics. It's been a very long time since I last visited Martha's Vineyard, so I wouldn't feel comfortable like discussing that completely and feeling knowledgeable about it, so I won't for this video, but I will say please go do some research because it's very fascinating. Once the production team knew where they wanted to set up this series, they were definitely looking to find cast members that they felt would be both emblematic and representative of the population that goes there and vacations there. That's how they found our resident mom and dad, Silas and Jasmine Cooper, as the first 2 cast members.
I'm Mrs. Cooper, recently, newly. We literally just got married 3 months ago. It's something that we're adjusting to. This is like our first time coming back as a married couple. Gosh, that's so cute. Come here.
Like in the flagship, there's always one couple and they tend to be the mom and dad. This does not mean that mom and dad are mature enough or even old enough to be mom and dad. It's just that because they are the couple, there is a different standard that is placed upon them, and I will get into that later in this video. The rest of the cast lines up with Jordan Emanuel, Shanice Henderson, Bria Fleming, Summer Marie Thomas, Jason Like, Preston Mitchum, Amir Lancaster, Alex Tyree, and Nick Arrington. And I did want to put a side note that Mariah Torres was also in this series. She originally was in place of Summer, but was asked to leave after the 3rd episode, and so she isn't technically credited as a cast member, but I did want to shout her out because she was a real one.
This girl just washed her damn dog shit with the...
What?
Your dog stuff was in there with the clean towel.
All right, and?
Okay, so after I did that, there's other towels in there which are mine, but your dog stuff is mixed
I
in
put
with
the
there.
pool towels and then this. This is fine. This is
Come
a
on,
you
it's over.
problem.
We already talked
It's
about
a
it.
you problem.
Girl,
Watch
take your
Watch your tone. Watch your tone. Watch your tone.
No, you watch your tone.
Watch your tone.
You watch
your tone.
Justice for Mariah. What I found to be most significant about this spinoff is because of the core of the friendship. Like I said about the flagship series, Summer House is focusing on friends, but in a way, I do feel like the original show focuses on the male friends, and the females are more of people that just either grew up with the male cast members or they are potential love interests for the cast members. In Martha's Vineyard, it's kind of the opposite, with the females being the core friendship. So, like I said before, Silas and Jasmine Cooper are resident vacation mom and dad. They have just recently gotten married prior to the show and are adjusting to life as a married couple. Spoiler alert, it honestly goes poorly. Very poorly.
We are going to the strip club. I mean, free drinks are great.
What?
We can get free drinks too.
If we get free drinks,
I don't think there's a problem with that.
what I'm saying is if you accept a free drink, the wrong guys will take that as an invitation.
You guys are just intimidated, and it's fine because we're gonna have a great time, and we actually want you guys to have a great time.
Take your own drinks.
Now, I will say that Shanice and Alex, they managed to get through the 2 weeks slightly unscathed, as well as Summer. There's even a little teased relationship between Summer and Alex, something that I think is going to be continued in season 2, which is airing on March 24th. But they do sometimes get into squabbles with other members of the cast, but I think that's just kind of the energy that just circulates for, the whole 2 weeks, because this is a little bit different from the flagship show in that they are stuck in the same home for the whole 2 weeks. It's not just on weekends. So there's a little bit more of like cabin fever, and I think that's like something to kind of give them grace for. So Preston and Jordan were obviously my favorites, and I feel like they ended up being fan favorites for a lot of different reasons. I noticed Preston was being highlighted so much at BravoCon, and I also loved the fact that Jordan was immediately thrust into Winter House Season 3 right after filming Summer House Martha's Vineyard. So I felt like they already knew kind of who was going to be the knockout stars. Now there's also Nick. Nick is, I think, technically the Luke of the friend group, and if you watch Summer House, you know what I'm talking about. He's fine. I mean, he gets up in a few triangulation issues, but nothing really happens to him by the end of the season. Nothing really happens to him.
Nick has slid in my DMs, and I put him on restrict. I was tired of the hard eyes. I was tired of the fire signs responding to my stories, which I thought was whack.
Oh my God.
So cute.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
All that's playing in my head is Aaliyah, if your girl only knew that you came in single.
Now, this is where we get into the drama, the bigger pieces of drama that I think were filtered over the entire season. Bria Fleming is the quintessential mean girl. I think she was going for like a Paige DeSorbo vibe, but it ended up being a little bit much. But yeah, Bria's honestly just an agent of chaos. Like, she brings her poor German boyfriend to meet everyone mid-end way through. And honestly, like, the whole is he coming, is he not coming is like a point of contention throughout the entire season.
You're bugging the out and chill the out.
Okay, chill
Are you
out.
bugging right now?
Yes.
Snap back into reality. To watch the dog for
It's
2
not-
seconds?
You didn't
And you
ask
go to
me
your
to watch the
suppliers
dog.
every day?
You just telling me. Why you not watching the dog?
You're
That's a
bugging.
difference.
Stay outside.
The next biggest arc is between Amir and Jordan. So for the entire season, Amir, who's kind of the like newcomer to the show and to the friend group, he very much sets his sight initially on Jordan. And this becomes a bit of a ship that doesn't really manifest because Jordan ends up finding out about the fact that he has, in his own little way, claimed her or made suggestive implications that he was specifically vying for her affection.
I didn't play about celibacy for a year. I went through a lot. A million times at this point.
I don't think what...
I know what you don't think. Because you've done it to me too.
If we're doing the whole bros call dibs first,
I'm here for Jordan.
pronouncements are being made.
I felt like you pissed on the tree was me. I didn't get the opportunity to say what I felt.
The only thing that I did was say, I am interested in said person.
This, I think, spoke to a lot of women, maybe not just Black women, but definitely, I do think, at the minimum, Black women who are feeling overly sexualized. She pretty much discussed the fact that she hates the triangulation that was occurring, where people were saying how much Amir liked her, and, you know, Amir wasn't really expressing any of that verbally on his own. Now, there is some projection that is happening here, but I do think that Amir came on strong, and that kind of gave Jordan the ick, and that's partially why I think when she found out about all of this, she was ready to be on the offense. All in all, by the end of the season, lies have been aired, friendships are damaged, people have been voted out of the house, and the illusion of Black excellence is shattered when the resident mom and dad, the Coopers, begin fighting consistently, and their lack of somewhat newly marriage bliss is exposed as a facade. For Jasmine and Silas, like I said, they are adjusting to being newlyweds. I think they feel that there is this pressure that's being placed on them by the other cast members simply because they're all still single. And because of that, there is this huge amount of effort that you can see being placed on Silas and Jasmine to make sure that not only are the rest of the cast members having a great time, but that they aren't being judged in their decisions. And then there's the episode with the pants. At the point in time of recording, and I'm hoping by the time this video gets out, season 2 has not aired yet. Up until, honestly, a few weeks ago from today's recording date, they finally dropped a trailer. It took forever. I was seeing a bunch of coming soons, and never a date. Now we know it is March 24th, and I'm really curious to see what's going to happen, because so far I've noticed that Silas is not present in the ad, and I do believe Silas and Jasmine did have a baby in between the wrapping and recording of season 2. I also found some reasoning behind maybe why this was being postponed is because on the Vineyard Gazette, it seemed like there was some drama between production and the residents of Oak Bluffs. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, okay, this is interesting and all, telling me about the breakdowns of the season, but why does this matter, and what does this have to do with Linden Hills? I know that we are in a different space, but I thought that this would be a good time to get into Linden Hills, the book that I read and spent way too much time editing for this video. So Linden Hills was a book written by Gloria Naylor. It is actually her second book and was actually used as a dissertation while she was at Yale receiving her master's. So Linden Hills was officially published in 1982, and it does focus on both the harrowing trials of Black excellence with the twist of a Dontorian framework. I am mostly focusing on the literary structure that Naylor uses to formulate Linden Hills and how this ties into not just Summer House, but the concept of Black excellence as a trope. I wanted to go with this vibe, go with this opulent outfit today to kind of explain to you the importance of not just Black excellence and how this ties into the Dantean framework that is used with hell, but how Gloria Naylor uses it to show that our behaviors have its own contribution to the destruction of our Black community. In Dante's Inferno, we have Dante and his guide Virgil, but instead we have Willie Mason and his friend Lester Tilson. Lester Tilson is very similar to Virgil in that he is an autodidact and learns poetry by memorizing, whereas Willie is the one who commits to pen. Getting comfy. Gotta switch the cross legs. I feel like Sharon Stone. The catalyst for both Willie and Lester's descent into hell starts with Ruth, who serves as the Beatrice for Willie's Dante. We do learn, as we're starting to get more basic information about Willie, that he is in the closet and gay. And so Ruth serving as a platonic ideal and serving as platonic love is a little bit easier for us to understand in this context. Because the two boys are poor and young, Ruth decides to send them into Linden Hills as a quest for them to get money by doing various odd jobs on the different levels. And the way it's structured is very similar to Dante's Inferno. I remember when I was in English class, one of my teachers taught it to us as the idea of an ice cream cone. So you start off with the first plane of hell that goes eventually down into the very tip point. And at that tip is Satan, Lucifer. But in this term, it's Mr. Luther Nadid. Mr. Luther Nadid is described as a frog man who creates a very weird cyclical ritual where he will give birth to the very replica of himself by using a very light-skinned black woman to come into his home and become his wife. But as she is his wife, she is very much only a vessel for reincarnation. He does not see her as a person, and that does become its own side plot. Instead of having contracts that take people's souls, Luther Nadid uses leases and capitalism as a way of actually collecting the souls of those that he wants to have in hell. At the beginning, when we do meet Lester, who is living in this versions of limbo with his family, we do see that they are feeding into the black excellence trope. They want to live in Tupelo Drive, which is considered the lower depths of hell, but they haven't made the descent quite yet, and that is why they are still somewhat marred from the entanglement and the harm that I think Linden Hills ends up creating in its inhabitants and residents. Really quickly, I do want to kind of get into the Dante circles of hell because I do think that they are very important when I compare how the Naylor's versions of these levels starts to manifest, because they are definitely more race and class specific, but having that basic understanding early on is very important for this context. We start off with the first level being lust. Instead of two lovers being in an eternal embrace in this level, we see a wedding that is being held by one of the families that lives on that neighborhood. The groom is being set to marry one of the girls from a family that's lower down in the depths of Linden Hills. But it seems like the reason why he doesn't want to marry her is not just because of the social class and elevation or descent, in this case, that her family and riches would imply. In fact, instead, he is choosing by marrying this woman to completely hide his sexuality while doing so in front of his lover, who happens to also be his best man. Instead of them having to be in a complete embrace, their sin and subsequent punishment is for them to be completely unable to embrace again. And you start to see that what makes a sin in Dante's world may not necessarily be considered a sin in Naylor's version, but I do think that it is the behaviors that are chosen by these people on these different levels that does contribute to their subsequent outcomes and consequences. In our third level, which is technically Dante's third level of gluttony, we have Xavier, who is Roxanne's boyfriend. Roxanne is Lester's older sister, who, like I said before, is living in limbo, hasn't made the descent into hell, into black excellence, but is currently dating Xavier with the intent of getting further down the hill. Xavier, instead of being gluttonous, is overly restrictive. He monitors how much he eats. He monitors how much sun he gets. He actually ends up kind of consuming this idea of whiteness to the point where he doesn't see himself dating black women, and that's what makes Roxanne such a big shift in his plan. He even talks to one of his friends who's completely monitored the way that he consumes, excretes, and sweats because he is trying to maintain a certain visage of blackness that is still hidden under a white gaze. He is gluttonous because he is trying to rid himself and whitewash himself completely as a way of being able to show that he is successful. He is worthy of elevation or, again, descent. Naylor's novel often suggests toxic whiteness, in part, does its work the way not only by positing proper white behavior, but also by positing a supposedly separate and homogenous black race, and by conceiving of black individuals as potential or probable bearers of supposedly black traits. At the same time, it paradoxically encourages a whitening repression of such traits that do exist when African Americans seek acceptance within certain social spheres, largely defined by financial success. The fourth level, being greed in Dante's Inferno, is actually being manifested as a funeral. Is deciding to have Willie and Lester repaint his wife's bedroom now that she's passed and they are having her funeral. Instead of it being a proper mourning situation, however, you notice that all of the mourners there are applauding the widow's wife because she actually spent most of her life being very anti-black, which is interesting why this section would be the section of greed. She has been on boards that are displacing people from Wayne Putney. She's actually trying to get Wayne Putney demolished completely, and that has been her life's work. And it's interesting that everyone that is at this dining table, which only fits 12 people, mind you, which I thought was a perversion on the disciples, are spending their time cutting and eating, but not actually really doing anything but mindlessly consuming and patting themselves on the back for displacing other black people. And Willie watches this time, and that's when he starts to realize that something's going on in Linden Hills that is a lot more than just getting money and descending down a hill into a nicer and nicer house. The last of the listed levels of hell is Dante's version of anger. And I honestly think there was a little bit more than just anger here when looking at Gloria Naylor's version of this level, simply because it's the only level in Linden Hills where we see a person of God and also their relationship to God, as well as our version of Satan, which is Luther Nadine. Reverend Hollis is the main inhabitant that Willie Mason and Lester Tilson will interact with on this level. He has been living as a recluse. He does work as a reverend in the community's church, but he has this emptiness and this anger inside of him that he's unable to quelch because in some way he has abandoned God in his pursuit of success. Reverend Hollis has forsaken God, and not just God, but himself, by betraying his marriage values through infidelity, as well as increasing his amounts of substance use. And this has resulted in him isolating himself, being the only person in his home and the only one moved by his own sermons. It is when he meets Willie that he starts to see that he has moved further and further away from his true mission and passion in life. And that is one thing that you hear as a theme that happens in Linden Hills, is once you start to go down, you can't turn back. Linden Hills wasn't black, it was successful. The shining surface of their careers, railings, and cars hurt his eyes because it only reflected the bright nothing that was inside of them. Of course, Wayne County had lived in peace with Linden Hills for the last 2 decades, since it now understood that they were both serving the same God. Wayne County had watched his wedge of earth become practically invisible, indistinguishable from their own pathetic souls. I think that this is really important to think about when we get into not just the cast of Summer House, but the relationship to Martha's Vineyard, the things that get left behind in the pursuit of success and wealth. I wanted to get a little bit quickly into the reincarnations of Luther Nadine, because this is a very important thing with this version of the story, or at the time of which that Willie and Lester are going down through the hills to get their Christmas money for gifts. At the point in time that we are seeing Willie and Lester going down and doing jobs for Luther and the other residents around Linden Hills, we get a B plot where we are brought into the life of Mrs. Nadeed. What makes her interesting is because, like I said before, Luther is a frog-looking, dark-skinned man that produces a frog-like, dark-skinned son to a light-skinned woman. And this is a completed ritual that happens in every incarnation of every generation for the Nadeeds. Except this one. Luther Nadeed, for some reason, has decided he wants to marry a dark-skinned, educated woman. And instead of creating a frog-like dark-skin reiteration, they have a very, very light-skinned son. And this results in Luther putting his wife in a basement for most of this book. She is spending the rest of the novel reading through the diaries, recipe books, and log books of the previous Mrs. Nadeeds to learn what not just this means to her and what her contribution is to this cycle of reincarnation, but how to break the cycle. From his birth, he has been his father's son in flesh and now in spirit. But I tremble daily, for I fear it is even more than that. For 15 years, I have watched them both walk and talk and eat. Believe me, I am not losing my mind, but it is not just that he is Luther's son. He is Luther. What I really, really loved about Mrs. Nadeed is that her first name that we find out by the very, very end of the book, her name is Willa. And she serves as a direct foil to Willie Mason, which is our Dante. She serves as a foil for a lot of different reasons. Not only are their genders different, but I did find it very interesting that these were both two dark-skinned individuals that are learning to critique their own society that not only deals in colorism and class, but what it means to be properly Black and what Black success looks like. By the end, we find that Willa has decided to side with herself and Luther, ending his dynasty, and Willie Mason leaves Linden Hills, not for Putney Wayne, but just for something better, something that is authentic. And I think that this is why this book really stuck out to me, because it wasn't just showing us that the way towards Black excellence is just a path downward into our own self-destruction, but that there are other non-arbitrary ways that we can still be successful without holding us to a restrictive and whitewashing path. Linden Hills is a modern version of Dante's Inferno, in which souls are damned not because they have offended God or have violated a religious system, but because they have offended themselves. In their single-minded pursuit of upward mobility, the inhabitants of Linden Hills, a Black middle-class suburb, have turned away from their past and from their deepest sense of who they are. Naylor could not have chosen a more suitable framework. The Dantean model emphasizes the novel's serious moral tone and gives a universalizing mythic dimension to what otherwise might be considered a narrow subject, the price American Blacks are paying for their economic and social success. So now that I've gotten into the plot points of Linden Hills, I wanted to really discuss the themes of Linden Hills and why I chose to compare it to Summer House, Martha's Vineyard. Linden Hills focuses on the themes of class, sexuality, and race, as well as how intersectional identities influence fear responses between those who want to achieve the American dream. And Bravo is successful for highlighting the lives of the rich and relatively famous to keep the illusion of the American dream alive. And in this instance with Summer House Martha's Vineyard, it's the illusion of, like I've been saying before, Black excellence. Like I said when I was originally talking about the level of greed and the 12 disciples, I thought it was really interesting that the cast of Summer House Martha's Vineyard only consists of 12 people. When I look at the cast of Summer House Martha's Vineyard, I don't necessarily see them as sinners, but more so complicated individuals. When I think about Silas and Jasmine, them trying to work out what it means to be married and what expectations of marriage looks like, especially when you are trying to elevate in class as a dark-skinned Black couple. I also think of just the Black women that were featured in the show, considering the fact that there were more Black women cast members. When I think about how Jasmine was considered Hillary Banks attractive because she was light-skinned and was the closest to being perceived as white, that most of the men found her attractive because of that. This is where we get into the storyline with Jordan, because like I said in my previous parts of this video, the cast of Martha's Vineyard is different because the main friend group starts with the female cast members, and the way that they know each other is unconventional, considering the fact that they were all Playboy bunnies at the New York restaurant prior to being on this show.
We worked together. I was a proud Playboy Club bunny, and there I met Jordan and Shanice and Bria. And honestly, Shanice and Jordan and I hit it off. I haven't really gotten to know Bria, and we weren't as close, but when Shanice said she wanted to invite Bria, I was like, okay.
Jordan is the only one that stays with Playboy and even becomes Playmate of the Year, but that's what immediately puts a target on her back when she goes into the summer house, because everyone just sees her as performatively sexual.
Right off the bat, there's several men that are like outspoken about like wanting to pursue you romantically, and it's sort of like, I like how you didn't like fall into any of that right away, honestly.
It got a little bit tiring, not because of the pursuit, but it was like kind of like what you asked about the vote. It was like, was I included in this decision?
Exactly.
You guys are over here claiming and doing this, that, and the third, but yet I haven't been informed of any of this.
Novel. If I had to compare the castmates from Summer House Martha's Vineyard to some of the characters in Linden Hills, I would say that Preston very much reminded me of Willie, Mariah very much reminded living there. And she realizes that in this moment of being evicted that she feels nothing. And she sees that her grandmother is asleep. She goes to the pool, forgets that it's empty because it's the middle of winter and it's Christmas time. And instead of leaving, she decides to swim into the empty pool to become free. Willie finds her, Lester finds her, and when they see her and they pull her from the pool, no longer a person there. It is just the blurry image of what used to be. And when I got to this part of the book, I found myself having to take a few minutes because we finally got to see what the consequences of Black excellence could potentially look like. When we restrict ourselves, when we completely eradicate what makes us unique, what makes us culturally significant for the sake of wealth, what are we giving of ourselves in return? Are we giving away our femininity? Are we giving away our intelligence? Are we giving away our critical thought? Are we giving away our sense? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Bye, everybody.